I am now very happy, very excited to introduce our guest speaker. All right, Esther, I'm going to go ahead and turn on your video. And our guest speaker is Esther Valdes Clayton. Her video is being turned on right now. And Esther studied law at UC Berkeley. She also graduated from UC San Diego. She was admitted to the State Bar of California in 2003. She's a principal attorney at Valdes Associates in San Diego. The firm represents clients in immigration cases in California, Arizona, and Texas. She's regularly featured on Telemundo, on Al Rojo Vivo, and has also been interviewed by the LA Times, San Diego News Tribune, KUCI, I believe I'm saying it correctly. I was watching one of the interviews you did there a few weeks back. And she is here. She's going to be sharing with us the lessons that she has learned along her political journey, and also her advice on how to reach out to California residents with the Republican message. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there will be a Q&A portion towards the end. I encourage you to type in your questions as soon as you have them. Type in your questions. I'm going to be compiling them, and then I will ask them of Esther at the very end. So without further ado, Esther, I am going to unmute you, and then it'll be all you. Let me find you to unmute you. Hold on a second. You're still muted. All right, Esther, it's all you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have some online. It's such a pleasure to be online with you, talking about what really matters. A lot of people tend to shy away from politics. I've been a lifelong Republican. I can honestly say that. I have a letter that I wrote when I was 8 years old to Ronald Reagan. My family had just moved here from Mexico. I was the only American-born child of a family of 6. My mother and father both having immigrated to the United States from Mexico with my 3 older sisters. We came to the United States because my father was a religious worker, a Baptist minister. And when we first came here in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, we recognized that this country was exceptional from its inception, that God had a plan for this country. We were so grateful to be here. We never took our freedoms for granted. And I recall my father, who just recently passed away, telling us to learn from this country and the great history. So I have no qualm in my body when I say that my forefathers were here in this country fighting for the revolution. Even though it is not a blood inheritance, the idea of America is something that is the call to freedom for everybody in the world. When we think of America, it's not just a country, it's an idea. So politics is something I'm very passionate about. I never shy away from, especially in a lot of circles. And you might have those social circles where a lot of your family or friends say, hey, I don't want to talk politics. But we always talk politics. If you talk money, if you talk business, if you talk education, if you talk Roe v. Wade, if you're talking about the lockdown, politics is the philosophy, is the driver to every decision that a politician, a legislator, an educator makes at every level. And we're seeing that now with the coronavirus on a macro and a micro level. So those are some of the topics that I want to discuss today. I titled today's topic, the Latinos and Elections 2020. Why Latinos? Why the election? Well, it's obvious we're in an election year. But as Republicans, and like I mentioned, I've been a lifelong Republican since I was 8. I've always voted, not just because of the party ticket, but because of the origins of the Republican Party. As we know, those of us who study history, I graduated with honors from UCSD with a degree in history, and then I went on to UC Berkeley, where I received my law degree. And I've been a practicing attorney since 2003, largely in immigration and employment law. But when you take a look at history, we come to understand that there's 2 schools of thought here. There's both macro and micro. What I try to define when I argue with people or I debate, it's like, do they have a narrow focus on the here and now and their problems? But generally they lack a context. The context is, what does history tell us? What does history teach us? What are the origins of the problem? And what are the right solutions? So that's what I really want to discuss today, Latinos and what we can do to not only win back this state, because I believe it's winnable, but also to articulate to the party that I love, the Republican Party, that from its inception was a party of freedom, the party of the emancipation of slaves, the party that stood up for the Second Amendment gun rights for the free emancipated slaves, the party of Lincoln, and not only that, but the party that was pro-life from its inception, where Abraham Lincoln, in wanting to pass the 13th Amendment, said, we can free the slaves now in this generation, but let's talk about their future, their descendants. I want to make all men free forevermore, for generations, and that's what came about with the 13th Amendment. Again, it's something I'm very passionate about because most people tend to think the opposite. When they think of Democrats, they think of the party of race and freedom and minorities and fighting for the rights of marginalized groups, when it's exactly the opposite. And when we have these conversations in Republican gatherings like we have right now, this is the time to bring up the debates, the thoughts, why we're losing in the public sphere, these origins and these philosophies that the Republicans engendered from their inception. Remember, the Republican Party at its origin was made to free African Americans, to free man from the slavery of another man, to make sure that the socialist democratic plantation owners, and I called them socialists because they told the slaves, you work and I'll live off of what you earn. That's what socialism is. That's how they operated. They made people work, but they held on to their wages and they enjoyed the fruits of another person's labor. That is socialism, and we're still fighting that today. And I believe it's imperative to keep fighting the good fight here in California, precisely because, number one, we love this state. Otherwise, we wouldn't be politically involved. Number two, as you can see, I'm Mexican. I am Latina. I am the fourth daughter of a family of six, like I mentioned. I'm a first-generation immigrant to the United States. And by and large, for the last 20 years, I had the privilege of raising my daughter by myself. I just got married 7 months ago, praise the Lord. But before then, I was a single parent. As a single parent, not only are there financial strictures, but there's also a lot of difficulties, not just financial, but social, in raising a child by your own. And the reason why I share this is because there's a lot of people who can't leave this state. There's a lot of people that I fight for, and you can see I'm here in my office. I'm an immigration attorney. They can't leave, and there are a lot of immigrants who come to this country. They come here seeking freedoms that we're losing on a daily basis. As you can see, we're meeting via Zoom because a governor and their legislature, which we know are mostly all Democrats, they decided for us what was best for us, what was best for our health, what was best in terms of our constitutional rights. They in effect suspended our freedom of association, our freedom of assembly, our freedom of worship. And lo and behold, there weren't a whole lot of protests with that because this state has been under the control of one party and we failed in the public debate. And I want to bring that back. I believe we can win this fight. And one of the ways to win it is to win the Latino vote. Why does the Latino vote matter? Let's talk about that. Thank you to Silvika for the wonderful introduction. I've had the privilege the last couple of years. In 2016, I ran for office in my hometown of Coronado. I was a first-time candidate. I didn't know what to expect. People told me, wow, you're a single parent. You are a Latina in a 92% Caucasian district. How are you going to win? And I said, by the grace of God, I'm going to do it. I have ideas. I have a plan. I care about school. I care about education. I'm the product of public schools. I know what's wrong. I know what works, and what works is school choice. I know what people want, and it's that their students thrive. I know that Latino parents, like any parents, Asian, Black, or white, want a great quality education, and we don't get it. I saw the inequity, I saw the unfairness, and most of all, as a Christian, I also saw the morality that was being passed on, the indoctrination that was being passed on in the public schools. And I said, this is a fight that I need to do it. If nobody else is going to, I'm going to raise my money. I'm going to knock door to door. And I did end up winning that election as a school board member in the city of Coronado with 67% of the vote. I was later reelected in 2018, so I'm on my second term now. The reason why I share that is because oftentimes we discount the Latino vote as, wow, they're all Democrats. Kind of like what Joe Biden said in that infamous radio interview last Friday when he was on an African-American radio show, and he said, you ain't black if you don't vote for a Democrat. What that really says is that somebody who is a certain skin color must vote for a Democrat. And we see that same mentality for a lot of Latinos. People who look like me, if we dare mention that we are Republican, all of a sudden it's your culture's questioned, your ethnicity's questioned, your convictions are questioned. I mean, how many immigration attorneys do you know that are Republican? But I fire back. I fire back with the truth, with what I witnessed, with my own testimonial. To share a little bit about myself, I was born in 1973. And the reason why that should matter to all of us, not because it's my birth year, but in 1973 was when Roe v. Wade was decided. Roe v. Wade, of course, legalized abortion in this country. When I talk about the Latino vote, I talk about it with a lot of passion because it is a Roe v. Wade problem. Since 1973, my birth year, there's been over 60 million abortions, 60 million murders of children of all ethnicities, mostly a lot of minority children in the state of New York, especially in New York City. There's more abortions of Black children than live births. So when we talk about all of a sudden all the rage right now is Black Lives Matter, they do matter, absolutely. But I want to see those same rioters in front of Planned Parenthood, because as we know, Planned Parenthood targets Latino, African American, and Asian communities for their infanticide and for their the annihilation, an American annihilation of a generation of Americans, in effect 60 million. The last census tells us that there have been 60 million Latinos here in the United States, myself being one of them. In 1998, I was a law student at UC Berkeley. I had my first boyfriend, and lo and behold, I became pregnant. And he did not want the child, so we went to an abortion clinic, and they happened not to be able to perform the procedure and referred me out to see where they could locate the fetus because they couldn't find what was going to be my daughter. The nurse there happened to be able to locate my daughter and allowed me to hear the heartbeat through an ultrasound. Well, all of a sudden my world changed because it was the exact opposite of what Planned Parenthood had told me. They had told me it was only tissue, there was no heartbeat, it didn't have a right to life. But I was hearing my daughter's heartbeat on the ultrasound. And right then and there, I became just completely pro-life and a complete defender of a person's rights under the Constitution to say they have the right to life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, no matter how small they are. Why does that matter to Latinos? If you've talked to your Latino friends and neighbors, people who may work for you, people who do services for you, we are people who are faith-filled. We believe in God. We are monotheistic. We share a lot of cultural affinities with the European races who came here to the United States as immigrants as well. By and large, 60% are Roman Catholic. About 30 to 37% are evangelical Christian, meaning we are pro-life. We want to preserve life. The last census in 2010 revealed that there were 60 million Latinos here, almost the exact number of children that had been killed since 1973 in Roe v. Wade. Why do Latinos matter in the Latino vote? Because not only do they represent all of the workers that were lost, but also they're the ones who are building a lot of manufacturing industry, restaurant industry, construction, education. The children that are filling our schools in 8 out of 10 metropolitan cities are Latino children. When we talk to our Latino friends, persuading them, hey, why do you vote Democrat? Do you have to vote Democrat? A lot of them will respond, well, they really don't know why they vote Democrat, just that Democrats, by and large, defend the blue-collar worker. And you can question, well, why are you a blue-collar worker? Well, because I can't make it on, I live paycheck to paycheck. Why do you live paycheck to paycheck? Did you know that it's the Democrats that make it so expensive to live here? Did you know that Democrats are the ones who raise your taxes? Did you know that the Democrats are behind the lack of school choice? So wherever you live, which are typically for most Latinos, they live in a very poor neighborhood with not the best schools. So you bring it back to them and articulate, well, did you know the very party that you're voting for are the ones that are segregating you? You're in an economic barrio, you're in an economic ghetto, and by and large, it's for the people who vote, who tell you to vote and continue to vote for them and take their vote for granted. So I always bring it back to, why do you vote the way you vote? Sometimes it's tradition. Sometimes it's because of their faith. Most Latinos are Roman Catholic, and a lot of Roman Catholicism, especially now with the ascent of Pope Francis, we see a lot of liberation theology. Liberation theology is not necessarily biblical, even though as people of faith, we're called to free the oppressed, set the captive free, fight for those who are destined to die, but they take it to another level. They take it to a level of activism, of identity politics, and of the oppressed versus the oppressor, when that's not the case. As Republicans, we're called to engage, and this is exactly what I always, wherever I go and talk to, I want to engage all Republicans and create what's called a new intersectionality. You may have heard that term. A lot of people, especially the younger generations, the millennials, they talk a lot about, well, I'm oppressed because of my race, my color, my skin color, my nationality, my gender, my sexual orientation. Well, those are their talking points to divide and conquer. If you look at the news even right now, what's going on in Minnesota, we're seeing race riots. Now that the impeachment didn't work, now that coronavirus didn't work, now that the economy is back opening up, and Trump may also win the re-election, now they're circulating their fourth play, which is the race card. They want to incite a race riot. Well, we want to elaborate and talk about that dialogue, because for a lot of millennials, younger voters, that's what they're used to hearing. They're used to hearing us against them, dividing everybody into a category. The Pat Nixon Women's Federated group is a gendered group. So what I always try to do is talk and engage on what they know, what is relevant to them. You can see me, I'm a woman, I'm a Latina woman, I used to be a single parent. So I have 3 little check marks next to me that give me this authenticity. As women, we use what we got. Okay, we are women. Automatically, they presume that we are oppressed by the oppressor. So we want to engage, well, why do you feel oppressed? Are you not an individual? Do you have certain freedoms? Do you know you can avail yourself of certain rights? Are you able to question what it is that is causing you to be confined into this set political mentality? What I'm articulating tends to go from the macro to the micro, meaning I'm also a commentator at KUSI News here in San Diego, and I've been on Fox News several times, a lot of national broadcasts. What a lot of Democrats miss the point is they get fixated on the micro thoughts, what's relevant to me, my identity, my gender. And what I want to create as a Republican party, and even a Republican organization, and even on my personal level, I want to create a new dialogue, what I call a new intersectionality of categories that we have in common. We are not a bunch of genders and races and sexual orientations. We are all Americans. We all aspire to the rights of the Constitution. We all aspire to jobs, to freedom, to economic liberty, to being able to go sit at the beach, go worship the Lord on Sunday morning, to be able to give birth to our children and be able to support them and not have somebody tell me, you shouldn't have that child, like somebody did at the abortion clinic. They saw me, I was unwed, single, and a minority woman. They said, you know what, you can't have this child, you can't afford this child, it's going to be cyclical poverty for you. But lo and behold, none of that happened to me. My daughter just graduated from the University of Redlands. She just received a scholarship to go study at Northeastern to get a master's in engineering. Everything they told me that was going to happen never happened. And they're the politics of low expectations. And as Republicans, we're called, just like Silvika mentioned, to give hope. There is hope for this state. And I believe the pathway forward is to engage Latinos on several fronts and not give an inch. I'm not about to yield the state to the likes of Gavin Newsom and the Attorney General Javier Becerra and our senators to question our loyalties as Americans. We can fight this fight. For example, on immigration, many people always ask me, how can you be an immigration attorney and be a Republican? Well, if you look at immigration, immigration is largely a benefit, as I mentioned, because of the missing children here in the United States. Because of Roe v. Wade, we have 60 million missing children that aren't in schools, are doctors, missing teachers, missing construction workers. These are replacement workers that are here in the United States that also give us lower wages, which we enjoy every time we go to a restaurant, every time we engage a service industry. Maybe your landscaper, maybe a coworker is able to work here in the United States for better competitive wages, bringing down the cost of those services here in the United States. But the other side of that is the question of illegal immigration. When a lot of Democratic peers try to talk about illegal immigration, what they're really doing is saying that the United States has the burden and the obligation to take everybody in, have an open border. We have a moral duty to allow everybody in, to the extent that now California is designated as a sanctuary city. I always try to explain, as a Christian, the whole idea of sanctuary cities came from the Bible. In the book of Numbers, chapter 35, we read that it was God's idea to create a sanctuary city, not so somebody could escape the law, but so that they would have due process and that they would be able to be beholden to the law and not to mob justice. And of course, here in California, what sanctuary city policies actually do is that if they arrest somebody, the authorities will not contact immigration authorities so that that person is deported. What happens a lot when I represent a lot of victims of crime, human trafficking, women who have been victimized and abused, they call the police and they believe that they're doing the right thing in reporting the crime. But lo and behold, later on, they find that their aggressor, the person who caused them harm, is released, because under California sanctuary city policies, unless they got a conviction or it was one of a limited amount of crimes, they're released back into the communities. And what a lot of the Democrats in power say, it's like, oh, good, because we're not going to cooperate with the Trump policies. But really, in reality, in those immigrant communities, what it causes is more fear. It causes these women to take their children and have to flee to a domestic violence shelter, to have to leave the state, have to leave the city, so that they can be able to protect their families. That's really what this fight is about. Because when you talk about immigration, we do want to help. We want to be humanitarian and we want to sound compassionate, but we also want to do what's right. Excuse me, I'm about to cough. Does anybody have a question at this time?
We have had one question so far, but if you want, you can just continue going, and I'll ask them all at the end. Yes, you're coughing. Oh, hold on. I think I need to unmute you. All right, you're good to go.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. I talk a lot, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. As I was discussing about immigration, when a lot of our Democrat peers want to make America have that choice, you have to let everybody in, they're just coming in here to work. It's a false dichotomy and it's a false argument. Why, when we talk about the separation of families, automatically we talk about the children in cages, but nobody really talks about the children in cages under the Obama administration. I was a practicing attorney from 2012 to 2016 when Obama was in power, even back in 2008. And I was able to visit a lot of women and children who were already separated in a lot of the detention centers in Texas and New Mexico. And they were separated, but nobody had an outcry. Nobody complained about families being separated. And what I always mention to them is, does it not bother you that this family separation started in their country of origin, when the dad had to get up and leave because the governments of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua didn't provide a safety net or an economy where they could earn a living and support their families? That's where the separation of families really starts. It starts in the countries that allow their best and their brightest, their young stars, the people who are the most audacious, they have to leave and come to the United States. What we need to do is exactly what the Trump administration has been doing. What they've been doing is making it about a humanitarian need, making this an international right, calling into question a lot of diplomatic channels, asking for accounting for the humanitarian millions and billions of dollars that we have given to Mexico and the Central American and South American countries to do what is right for their own citizenry. And why haven't they done that? Because of corruption, because they've pocketed a lot of their money, and they usually don't, it never gets to the people who need it the most. But is it the United States' obligation to provide for the citizens of the world? No, it's the countries and the governments of Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, who have the chief and primary obligation to provide for their own citizenry. Why doesn't anybody get bothered about that separation of families? And if we really want to get down to it, is nobody bothered by the separation of women and children at Planned Parenthood? Because that is a forever separation too. But again, they're not looking at the macro. They're not looking at a political context. They're not looking at a sociological or economic context. They want to just argue the micro. They want to argue a very narrow set of outrages and hostilities, perceived hostilities towards the oppressed by the oppressor. And we got to get out of that dialogue, especially with Latinos, because that's everything you hear in public schools, everything you hear from Latino leaders or from so-called race leaders or a lot of liberal leaders. Everything seeks to divide us. And again, we need to come into places of commonality with Republicans where we talk to Latinos just like you would to your regular friends. Do you or do you not care about what's going on? Why do you have to leave this state? Do you care about high taxes? But the one most telling topic that I can tell you that every Latino will care about, regardless of economy, gender, sexual orientation, country of origin, it's children. And one of the things that I believe that as Republicans, why we lost this state is precisely because we forfeited the social issues. Social issues still matter. We cannot be the party about economic recovery, about exclusively small business, exclusively lower taxes. All of those things matter. But when you talk to Latinos, a lot of them don't have a lot of money. With the coronavirus impact, almost half of Latinos who are undocumented here in the United States, especially in the state of California, have lost their job. 1/3 of Latinos, whether legal or not legal here in the United States, have lost their job. So even though we had stellar employment rates and we were earning higher amounts, and there were higher amounts of home ownership and small business ownership under the Trump administration before coronavirus started, all of that has been largely gone. So what we need to go back to is talking about those social values. Why? Because every Latino family has a child. Statistically speaking, a Latino woman has about 3 children, and the birth demographic is now lowering. But most Caucasian women have 2 children. Latinos come here, they cross rivers, deserts, either illegally or legally, because of their children. They're thinking about what is going to happen to my child. I want a better future for my child. So when we talk about the social issues, we talk about things that right away they understand. So I always question, like, how can you vote for somebody who's teaching your little boy to wear a dress or to question their gender? Right away they get it. Latinos, the men, I mean, they invented the word macho. They invented the word machismo. They have pride in being a father. Also the women. There's a huge culture just surrounding a love of children. We celebrate Children's Day. Right away when we talk about these issues, they connect. A lot of Latinos, most Latinos go to church, either Roman Catholic and evangelical church on Sundays. They understand God's word to say he made them both a male and female. So when you talk to them, you can also articulate, did you know what they're teaching you in school? Did you know this person that you voted for just voted for a lot of sex education? Just like recently, California just started with the California Healthy Youth Act, which is teaching children as young as 4 and 5 years old to choose their gender, to choose the pronoun, that they could be a unicorn, or that their parents may have assigned them a fake gender. A lot of Latinos don't know that, and that was something that at CSBA, which is the California School Board Association, as a school board member, when I went to the conference, I took up and argued along with several other school board members. We said, why aren't these materials in Spanish? Why aren't you telling the Latino parents what you are now going to teach in their curriculum? Why aren't these textbooks available in Spanish? Why isn't there an opt-out? Because they didn't want a lot of Latinos to know in a lot of school districts, because they knew what was going to happen. There was going to be an outrage and a fury. And that we had a lot of press conferences here in San Diego where we were trying to disseminate this information to a lot of non-English speaking communities. And of course, Muslims, Christians, Orthodox Jews. Once the parents heard about it, they were outraged. And again, that's something that Latinos hold dear, their children and what happens to them. The same holds true for pro-life. When you talk to a Latino, you ask them, how can you vote for a Democrat who wants to support the annihilation of your community, your children, your next generation, by giving money to people who want to give you the ability to kill your children, whether for finances or not? Why don't we support pro-life agendas, such as giving single mothers the ability to get a child care voucher, or after-school programs, or greater jobs? It always comes down to finances. And again, you question, why do you vote for somebody who keeps raising your taxes, somebody who keeps making home ownership out of the reach for a lot of younger Californians? Some people will never own a home here. Why? I always question why. I think we need to not give in to a lot of the mentality of saying it's us against them. I don't know how to relate to my Latino neighbors, because we want the same thing that everybody else wants. And going back to my point about creating a new intersectionality, it's creating categories of commonality. We are all Americans. We all want to work hard. We want to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We want our children to have a better life than we did. We want strong borders so we can enjoy domestic freedom and safety. We understand that with a strong border, even a strong border wall, The border wall is not just physical, it's also political. It's also holding to account a lot of the governments that for generations have sent their poor to the United States because they don't want them. They don't want their poor, and they don't want them back. But now the Trump administration, of course, you may have heard of the Migrant Protection Protocol. They stopped all asylum seekers from coming into the United States. They're waiting in Mexico. 55,000 people are waiting in Mexico that would otherwise have been here in the United States for years. While the immigration courts hear their case, they're working, having children, but the Trump administration stopped that. And that was recently upheld in the courts by allowing the Trump administration to exercise their executive power and say, yes, you can stop people from coming into the United States, and you can have them wait in Mexico. Why wasn't this done before? For years, the dialogue with a lot of open borders and Democratic leaders, they just kept telling us, you can't stop immigration, Latinos are just here to work. But we know from statistics, especially from the New York Times, 7 to 8% of immigrants from any country have a criminal history, a violent criminal history. They come here for no good, no reason, and it's not to work, it's to cause harm. The Trump administration earlier this year, during the State of the Union, they cited that they had reduced the level of unlawful immigration by 70%. So it was doable. We are able to do it. And what happens then is all of a sudden, lower illegal immigration, the highest wages that Latinos have enjoyed in over 40 years, the highest amount of employment rates for Latinos, because illegal immigration does hurt Latinos. All of a sudden, you're competing with people who are willing to work for half your salary, and it hurts the lowest wage earners. And that's something financially that everybody's always known, but nobody's ever wanted to do, except for the Trump administration. So going back to the fact of this being an election year, it is imperative that we have these conversations either via Zoom, in person, and even in churches. A lot of churches, again, they have this stigma about, I don't want to talk about politics, but everything that we talk about when we talk about politics, God created. Whether it's marriage, whether it's family, whether it's children, whether it's education, abortion, economy, capitalist, labor, all of it, you find are subjects that are addressed in the Bible. So whichever place of worship that you do choose to attend, I would encourage you to engage the people at your church. It's not politics, it's God's word when we talk about all of these subjects. And if you're not a person of faith, you can easily talk about these themes with people that you work with, other people who may not look like you or even have a similar background. And again, that's one of the myths that the Democrats carefully perpetuate, is that you can only talk to somebody who looks like you because their experience and their background has value and you can't relate. Yes, we can relate, because these concepts are universal, and that's something that John Adams understood very well, and the framers of the Constitution, that they are universal truths, such as the fact that we have inalienable rights given to us by God that not even Gavin Newsom can take away. And that's something that we need to be able to articulate, especially as we move forward towards Election Day. So I want to thank you guys for welcoming me. I hope that these topics were interesting to you as they are to me, and that we just further fight the good fight together, because it is a fight and it is going to be a battle, but it's a worthwhile battle for our state, for our neighbors, and for our friends.
Thank you so much, Esther. Oh my goodness, you really hit home. I was keeping track of questions that we were receiving here and on social media. And one of the biggest questions actually, had been that, which specific social issues topics matter. But this was asked before the last portion of your talk, and so you already answered it. The great social issues, anything, especially the children. And one of the questions had also been about sex ed discussion, especially given of your position right now. So yes, so that was good. Awesome. You hit it out of the park there. Then we have a couple of questions related to your work. So someone asked, could you give us a sense of who is your typical client and what services are they requesting?
Excellent question. So I've been a practicing immigration attorney since 2003. I represent a lot of people who have been here undocumented in the United States. And because we haven't had immigration reform since the Clinton administration, we have a game of cat and mouse where a lot of people, a lot of businesses have been benefiting, whether restaurants, hotels, construction. They love hiring cheap. They love hiring under the table, and they love not paying taxes. Even, as you mentioned, a lot of the caretaking facilities, they hire a lot of people who are here undocumented so that they can create a thicker profit margin for themselves. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the immigrants here, they are working, but they haven't had a chance to become legal. And that's always a conundrum for a lot of people because they don't understand, so-and-so is such a good person. They're just working here. They have a family. Why can't they get legal? Because we haven't had real immigration reform, because the Democrats want to keep Latinos in the Democratic barrio. I call it the Democratic ghetto. They want to keep the blacks on the Democratic plantation. They want to keep the Latinos in their barrio so that every 4 years they trot us out and we vote Democrat again. That's why we haven't had immigration reform. Do we need it? Absolutely. Does it mean that you forgive everybody? No, that's not what we're saying. We can choose, just like the president said, we can categorize and ask for the best, the brightest, the educated people who speak English, people who have an education in their country of origin, people who have money to invest here in the United States. And that's what I help my clients to do. Just like John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I ask my clients, what are you here to offer? What do you want to do? And all of a sudden they said, you know what? I want to, I have my children, my son's in the military. I want to, I've worked steadily at this job. I've saved, I've earned, I've paid taxes. So I help them become regular residents of the United States with aspirations to become citizens. About 40% of my work is also asylum seekers, people who are legitimately fleeing violence on account of their race or their political opinion, their nationality, and now a lot of it is religious-based. People who are not freely able to exercise their religion either in Iraq or Syria or even Germany. I had an asylum case out of a homeschooling family in Germany who was not allowed to school their children unless they sent them to government schools. So I do a lot of that work. Some of it has been featured in a number of newspapers. I've successfully represented over 24 Mexican asylum cases and won those cases. Even though it has a 5% success rate, we are able to articulate, and what you do have to show is that the government is persecuting a person on account of their political opinion, their religion, their race, or their nationality. So that's a lot of the work. And the other maybe 10% of it are victims of crime, people, young women, even boys who have been trafficked into the United States to perform for criminal acts because the cartels, especially now with coronavirus, the border is shut down, so they can't easily traffic their drugs. But what they can do is bring in a child, bring in 2 children, 5 children, and sell that child over and over to be victimized, live streamed to satiate a lot of pornographers online. So a lot of that is illegal activity, and what they've discovered is that they make more money from a child or a woman being exploited than from the traffic of drugs. So that's very lucrative. And here in San Diego, we are a border town. It is a black market that is dismal, and it has a lot of young victims. So I also represent young victims of crime.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's our guest speaker in January. Anthony Cabasa had worked for 11 years at specifically the border, and he has quite a few horror stories of what's going on to the kids and the young women who are being trafficked there. Next question is, what is the approximate cost of an immigrant to become an American citizen at this time, if you know it?
Yes, so is this, to become an American citizen, you have to first become a permanent resident here in the United States. To become a permanent resident, you have to be the immediate relative or a relative of somebody who is already a resident or a US citizen. So the cost varies on how many steps you have to take. So for example, if my husband is an immigrant from England, so if he had brought me over from Mexico, he would have first had to file an I-130 petition. The costs of that are on uscis.gov. They're pretty accessible, but there may be a fee hike because if you watch the news, USCIS, the Immigration Services, wants to file for bankruptcy and they're asking for a bailout. So the fees that we pay are not enough to fund all of the jobs there. So it really depends on how many steps you have to take. Just the citizenship application, the N-400, it's a little under $1,000. But again, to become a citizen, there's several steps to get to that point as well. And if there's any other violations of the law in between, they don't have to be criminal. They could just be like, wow, there was a period of time where you worked without a work permit, or you entered here unlawfully back when you, before you became a resident. You have to ask for a waiver, so that adds to the fees as well. But generally speaking, you can look up the fees at uscis.gov.
All right, thank you. And then that's, in addition to that, you know, the cost of actually moving, you name it. So yeah, I remember I came to the States also as a political refugee. We came on a religious and political asylum, and yeah, we had to sell everything we had and come with what little we could have. All right, okay, the last question was, could you repeat, you had mentioned that you had certain things that you would ask people to help them realize that the Democrats are behind the higher taxes and cost of living. You kind of had just rattled them off. If you could rattle them off again real quick. Quick notes.
I talk very fast. Well, you know, when you're engaging somebody, you know, regardless of their skin color, but, you know, you may have a lot of Latinos who tend to be Democratic voters. And we know that 66% voted blue in the state of California in the 2016 elections. So bit by bit, as Republicans, we need to take that back. We need to win back our state by engaging Latinos, by talking the talk, sharing your story, sharing, hey, how did you come to this country? How did you make it? How did you get to be a business owner? Why are you a Republican? Is it pro-life? You can start with just sharing your story, but also by also articulating a lot of things that matter to Latinos, such as asking them, like, you know, maybe they just mentioned like, wow, I have to have 2 jobs. Why do you need 2 jobs? Oh, because I can't pay the rent. Did you know that who did you vote for? Oh, I voted for Gavin because he's really for minorities and really helps people. And, you know, I voted for Garcetti because he really cares about people. Well, did you know that they're the very ones that made it so expensive? So you have to work 2 jobs. Oh, I used to be an Uber driver and now I can't. I just lost that gig. Did you know that these are the people that supported AB 5 and took away your ability to be an independent contractor? No, I didn't know that. Why don't they know that? Because a lot of Spanish media does not report this. So you're the transmitter for a lot of information that maybe we who are here on the Zoom call, we're privileged to be able to read Facebook, be on Breitbart, be on Drudge Report, and read all of this news and be able to join in protests. But I bet you, if a lot of Latinos had known what their Democratic leaders were doing in ordering a shutdown, stopping you from going to church, stopping you from opening your business, your nail salon, your restaurant, your taqueria, stopping your child from going to school, there would have been a horde of Latinos protesting in Sacramento, in Orange County, in San Diego, and Los Angeles. But this does not get down into the Spanish media because it's largely controlled by a huge liberal bias, where you are questioned if you question the Democratic leaders in this state. Your Latina-ness is questioned. Just like Joe Biden mentioned, and he said, you ain't black if you don't vote Democrat. we get it too. I've been called a coconut. I was speaking at a city in Northern California. They called the police. They said that I was going to incite a riot because I had new ideas. The new idea was the Constitution. The new idea was the fact that you could vote Republican and that I could be pro-life. I could vote for a child's right to life. I could vote for lower taxes, that I wanted stronger borders. See, for every problem that the Democrats raise, if you notice, everything that they talk about is a problem. Well, what about border? What about the oppression? What about inequity? What about the gender gap? What about the drug problem? They never have solutions because they don't want solutions. They don't want these problems solved for Latinos, Blacks, and or whites ever, because they're the base. The oppressed are the base. And as long as they're oppressed, they will keep voting blue. And that's our opportunity as Republicans, to be able to enter elections 2020 with from the words of Shakespeare, and I wrote it down, we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. This is the time to do it, when we need to spread the word. But also with the word goes the deed. We can be compassionate at our churches, at our political organizations, and be at the food bank. And every time we are giving money to the food bank or canned goods, making sure that that person knows, it's like, you know, you shouldn't be in this situation. You're in this situation because of the Democratic legislators that maybe you voted for. Oh, really? How so? Well, they could have, we have a very low coronavirus fatality rate. Why did they close your business down? Why is your child going to be behind a whole year in school because they weren't allowed to go to school? Because 2% fatality rate over coronavirus. Why did this happen? Oh, well, it's not the Democrats' fault. No, it's not the party's fault. It's the mentality, the pedagogy, the philosophy, the political philosophy. If you just bring it down to the fact of showing people a map of the United States, red and blue, showing the red states are open, the blue states are not. Why? Because it goes back to their fundamental philosophy, and the philosophy that as Californians, we know what's going on in Sacramento is this. They believe they know better than we do in making the decisions for our health, our business, our economy, our finances, our education, and they can strip it away, and they will strip it away. And if we don't fight it right now in these elections, that's what America is going to look like throughout the 50 states, especially if the president does not win, especially if we don't do something to hold on to the Senate.
Yes, perfect. All right, Esther, thank you so, so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Someone said, you are fierce. We enjoyed your talk. Please run for Congress. So thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who joined. We look forward to having future talks like this. And we will be posting this on our YouTube channel. Esther, the video will be there. I will send you the link once it's there. Once again, everyone, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. And take these points, use them, and let's go out compassionately, but also boldly